On 28 September 2018, a routine international flight became one of aviation's most dramatic survival stories. A Boeing 737 on approach to land hit the water, not the runway, and came to rest in the blue-green expanse of Chuuk Lagoon in Micronesia. Of the 47 people on board, 46 would survive. But the cost and the lessons would run far deeper than the waters of the lagoon. This is the story of Air Niugini Flight 73. How it began, what went wrong, how people saved themselves and each other, and what the investigation uncovered. Air Niugini Flight 73, call sign Niugini 73, IATA PX073, was a scheduled passenger service operated by Air Niugini, the national airline of Papua New Guinea. Its route was ambitious in its simplicity, from Phnom Penh in the Federated States of Micronesia, FSM, to Port Moresby, the capital of Papua New Guinea, but with a stopover in Chuuk, also in the FSM. This route was vital for regional connectivity. Phnom Penh and Chuuk are relatively remote islands, and flights linking Micronesia to Papua New Guinea support both local travel and onward connections. It's not a long-haul major airport route, but for many on board it was the key link. The aircraft used that day was a Boeing 737-8BK, registration P2PXE. This plane had decades of life. It first flew in 2005, and by 2018 had accumulated over 37,000 flight hours and more than 14,700 cycles, takeoffs and landings. Originally, this 737 had been delivered to Air India Express, registered as VTAXC, before making its way to Air Niugini. As for the crew, the captain was very experienced, with nearly 19,780 flight hours, of which around 2,276 were on the Boeing 737. The first officer, co-pilot, was also seasoned, though with fewer hours on the 737, about 368 hours. Also present in the cockpit on that flight was an aircraft maintenance engineer, not as a pilot or crew, but in the jump seat. He filmed part of the approach on his iPhone. On that fateful morning, Flight 73 departed Phnom Penh bound for Chuuk. Among those aboard were 35 passengers and 12 crew members, making a total of 47 souls on the aircraft. Passengers came from various backgrounds. Many were Micronesian, some were connecting onward via Port Moresby to other destinations. The flight from Phnom Penh to Chuuk was supposed to be a brief segment, a leg that many in the plane knew well. The crew, including the jump seat engineer, briefed for the approach. They planned to fly an RNAV GPS approach for runway 04 at Chuuk International Airport. At first, the weather cooperated. The descent began in visual meteorological conditions, VMC, meaning visibility was good, the sky reasonably clear. As the aircraft descended, things began to change. At around 546 feet, some 600 feet, conditions shifted. The plane entered instrument meteorological conditions, IMC, where visual references outside the cockpit became unreliable. At this point, the autopilot, which had guided parts of the descent, was disconnected. From here, the approach became unstable. The descent rate was too high, the flight path too steep. The crew flew an average glide slope of about 4.5 degrees instead of the typical 3 degrees for the RNAV approach. But perhaps most alarmingly, 13 oral alerts from the Enhanced Ground Proximity Warning System, EGPWS, blared in the cockpit, warnings about sink rate and glide slope. Yet, according to the investigation, the crew ignored these warnings. They did not properly acknowledge minimums, or the 100-foot advisory investigators later described the situation as a case of fixation. The pilots channeled their attention so narrowly that they missed the accumulating danger. The cockpit voice recorder, CVR transcript, provides chilling insight. Multiple alarms sounding in rapid succession, calls to pull up, but no decisive action to go around, i.e., abort the landing. At 10:10 local time, the Boeing 737 descended below the proper glide path and impacted the water of Chuuk Lagoon, about 460 meters, 1,500 feet, short of the runway threshold for Runway 04. Witnesses would later describe how the aircraft deflected across the water several times before it settled and rotated through about 210 degrees, coming to rest partially submerged. The landing gear separated on impact. Inside the cabin, water began to rise quickly. By some accounts, reaching over knee height in parts of the plane, local boaters were quick to respond. Small fishing boats and other local vessels converged on the wreck. Meanwhile, U.S. Navy divers were also on scene and helped in rescue operations. Evacuation was chaotic, but in many ways, heroic. Some cabin crew helped manage the exits. According to testimony, a life raft was launched from the left aft overwing exit. One cabin crew member, CC2, found a severely injured passenger underwater in the aisle. He managed to lift him and get him onto a boat. Another crew member, CC6, freed a passenger strapped into seat 17F, then helped move him over the wing to safety. The flight engineer in the jump seat and the first officer left via the main door, 1L, into a waiting boat. Other survivors used overwing exits. Some injured passengers were assisted onto boats. U.S. Navy divers also helped evacuate people from the right rear overwing. Tragically, one passenger, seated in 23A, did not survive. His body was not immediately recovered. Later, divers found him inside the aircraft, between rows 22 and 23, in the sunken fuselage. The autopsy revealed he had severe head and facial injuries, not drowning. Investigations noted he was not wearing his seatbelt at the time of impact. 6 others were seriously injured, some with broken bones. In total, 46 survived. Local aircraft rescue and firefighting, local boaters, and the U.S. Navy all played major roles in the rescue. Chuuk's airport manager, Jimmy Emilio, later said, "Everybody is alive. Everybody safely off the plane." In the aftermath, the Papua New Guinea Accident Investigation Commission, AIC, launched a formal inquiry. Simultaneously, Micronesian authorities also took part. Their investigation uncovered a number of critical issues. 1. Non-compliance with standard operating procedures, SOP. The crew did not fully follow Air Niugini's approach or pre-landing checklists, and they failed to adequately brief the RNAV approach. 2. Unstable approach trajectory. After the autopilot was disconnected, pilots over-controlled laterally. The descent rate was far too high. 3. Ignored warnings. The CVR and FDR data showed a total of 13 oral EGPWS alerts, sink rate, glide slope, after the plane descended below minimums 4. Situational awareness lost. According to the report, the pilots were fixated on control inputs and failed to properly recognize the developing unsafe condition. 5. Evacuation confusion. The AIC noted that some passengers did not understand the instruction, evacuate. Also, several carried their hand luggage during evacuation, contrary to safety instructions. 6. Regulatory concerns. The report criticized the Papua New Guinea Civil Aviation Safety Authority for not maintaining evidence-based assessment to guarantee safety. One particularly stark finding: a continuous whoop-whoop pull-up oral warning system might have helped. The AIC said that had such a warning been present instead of intermittent alerts, it might have alerted the crew more effectively to the immediate danger. So, Was this simply pilot error? According to the investigation, it's more nuanced. Human factors played a major role. The pilots were not malicious or reckless. Rather, they made a series of small mistakes and then failed to recognize just how dangerous their situation had become. The ignored warnings are especially poignant. Modern aircraft are full of safety systems, but they rely on pilots heeding them, and in this case, many of the alerts went unheeded. The evacuation phase also highlighted how critical cabin crew are. Several crew members helped save lives, including helping injured passengers underwater or moving them through exits. In rescue operations, local boaters deserve enormous credit. Their rapid response, their willingness to launch immediately into the water, saved many lives. The role of the U.S. Navy divers was also vital, especially in retrieving the body of the passenger who tragically died deep in the sunken plane. Looking back, were there red flags? Yes, both before and during the flight. 1. Approach briefing. The crew's brief for the RNAV GPS approach wasn't sufficiently thorough, according to investigators. 2. Checklist discipline. They failed to complete standard operating checklists. That's a major red flag in any aviation safety system. 3. Warning systems. While the EGPWS was working, the alerts were not treated with urgency. One might argue that the cockpit was too quiet in reaction. No forced or aggressive go-around call made. 4. Evacuation readiness. Passenger behavior during evacuation, some retrieving hand luggage, not understanding commands, suggests that safety briefings may not have been fully effective or stress overwhelmed them. 5. Regulatory oversight. The crash report pointed to weaknesses in regulatory evaluation and safety oversight by the Aviation Authority. Flight 73's legacy is not just in tragedy, but in the many lessons it leaves for aviation safety. Training and discipline. Crew training must emphasize not just procedure, but culture. The discipline to follow checklists, brief thoroughly, and respond decisively to warnings. Stabilized approaches. One of the most common causes of accidents is an unstable final approach. Investigators reaffirm how vital it is to go around when things deviate from the expected path. Alarm design. Could cockpit warning systems be more effective? The suggestion that a continuous whoop-whoop pull-up could have helped is significant and may influence future system designs. Passenger education. Evacuations in water are chaotic. Ensuring passengers understand evacuation commands and training crew to manage panic is critical community rescue role. The heroism of local boaters reminds us that in remote regions, community response is often the first and most critical line of rescue regulatory strengthening. Aviation authorities must hold operators to high safety and procedural standards. Oversight must be active, evidence-based, and to demand improvements. Air Niugini Flight 73 was not the first aviation accident, but in many ways, it stands out. Not because of spectacular crash footage, but because it was almost entirely a survival story. 46 people walked away, pulled from a sinking fuselage, from rising water, from danger, thanks to the bravery of flight crew, local rescuers, divers, and each other. Yet, the ship, or plane, sank. And beneath the surface lie not just the wreckage, but deeper questions about human decision-making, about safety culture, and about the razor's edge of modern aviation. The lessons from Flight 73 remind us, technology only protects as much as we let it. And sometimes the difference between catastrophe and survival is what we do in that instant when the alarm sounds. This was Into the Lagoon, the story of Air Niugini Flight 73, a tale of risk, error, rescue, and the strength of the human spirit. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so more critical stories of aviation and resilience can reach people around the world.